Dragon is in countdown. Falcon 9 is in startup. Dragon, SpaceX, go for launch.
You are looking live at Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. In less than half an hour, this Falcon 9 rocket will lift off carrying the 27th Commercial Resupply Services mission from both NASA and SpaceX to the International Space Station. Good evening and welcome to live coverage of the CRS-27 launch. I'm NASA's Jasmine Hopkins. Fueling of the Falcon 9 began about 10 minutes ago, and we're counting down to an instantaneous launch at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This mission will deliver more than 6,000 pounds of science, supplies, and equipment to the space station. And these resupply missions help NASA and our partners continue research that could better our life right here on Earth and help us as we explore deep space. Let's go now to SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where Zachary Lupin is standing by to tell us more about the vehicle supporting today's mission. Zach?
Thanks, Jasmine. Hi, everyone. My name is Zachary Lupin, and I'm an avionics reliability engineer here at SpaceX. It's great to be covering today's mission in partnership with NASA. For those of you following along, today marks SpaceX's second Dragon mission this month, 17th launch this year, and 216th mission overall. And on your screen is a live view of SpaceX's two-stage Falcon 9 rocket with our Dragon spacecraft at the very top. As a note, Dragon is one of the few vehicles that can deliver significant cargo to the space station and the only vehicle that can actually deliver cargo from it. Below Dragon is our Falcon 9 vehicle, which is actually two rockets in one. The lower part, also the largest part of the rocket, is called the first stage and takes up about 2/3 of the stack. It has 9 Merlin 1D engines, which accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere and into various orbits in space. The smaller stage above the first stage and the black inner stage is called the second stage. Now, the two stages will separate about 2.5 minutes into flight, and then the second stage will ignite its single Merlin vacuum engine, which is the 10th engine on the rocket, to carry Dragon to its desired orbit. Falcon 9 and Dragon were both designed with reflight in mind, and the vehicle hardware is built to support multiple missions with minimal refurbishment needed. Today's Dragon is flying for its 3rd time, and the Falcon 9 first stage is flying for its 7th time, and we plan to recover and fly both the vehicle and the spacecraft again in the future. So far, we've reflown 149 first stages, including Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, and we're planning to recover this booster on our drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas, which is currently stationed off the coast of Florida in the Atlantic Ocean. If successful, it will mark the 178th recovery of an orbital-class rocket. And lastly, we wanted to give a shout out to the recovery team supporting today's mission. In an industry that has historically been male-dominated, today's recovery operations are being managed by an all-female crew. In fact, we believe it to be the first all-female crew for any kind of operation like this. And if it's not the first, then we're in great company, and you can see shots of the crew there. Our recovery teams are responsible for operating the recovery vessels, securing and recovering the booster, and everything else required to make those operations possible. And on your screen right now is video of the crew breaking tow between our drone ship and our recovery vessel dug earlier today. This operation involves disconnecting the tow wire used to tow the drone ship from port onto location at the landing zone. We are in great hands with today's crew, and we wish the team a very successful mission. And for now, I'll turn it back over to Jasmine at KSC.
Thank you, Zach. In addition to SpaceX in California, NASA teams both here in Florida and Texas are monitoring today's launch. You'll hear from Dan Hewitt inside Mission Control in Houston. But first, let's check in with NASA's Megan Cruz, who's following along with the launch team here at Kennedy. Megan?
Hey, thank you, Jasmine. And yes, welcome everyone into Hangar AE at nearby Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The U.S. Space Force monitors the range for us, making sure that it's safe to fly where we plan to fly, as well as the weather, which is looking really great for us tonight. So right now we are at 90% go. Launch Weather Officer Arlena Moses listing the thick cloud layer rule as just a small concern. Basically, she's monitoring some high clouds in the area that's coming in because of an upper level disturbance in the Gulf, but really she doesn't think it's really much to think about. Now back out to the launch pad 39A. Right now, RP1 or rocket grade kerosene is being loaded into the first stage, already more than 85% full. Liquid oxygen is also going into the first stage, more than 50% already, and should begin on the second stage momentarily. Those white clouds you see that are billowing off, that's because SpaceX is venting off some of that liquid oxygen, and that happens when the liquid oxygen hits the humid Florida air. Now our instantaneous launch opportunity tonight is at 8:30 and 42 seconds Eastern Time if we want to dock with the International Space Station Thursday morning. For more on that, let's head on over to Dan Hewitt inside Mission Control in Houston.
Hey, thank you so much, Megan, and everybody. Welcome inside at Mission Control Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center. I'm NASA's Dan Hewitt. It's pretty quiet in the room right now. The Orbit 3 team is on console, led by Ace Flight Director Allison Bollinger. The crew is asleep on board the space station right now, and when they wake up tomorrow, we're hoping they've got a Dragon on their way towards the space station. It's going to be about 35 hours from launch until they dock on Thursday morning. They're going to be docking to the forward port on Node 2. That's the Harmony module on the station. That one was just vacated by the Crew 5 astronauts who left just a couple of days ago. Once they're able to dock, that's going to kick off a really furious month of science and cargo operations for the crew. They're going to have to work to execute a lot of these experiments while Dragon is still attached before they load it back up and send it home. Because again, Dragon, pretty much the only way we're getting large amounts of cargo back to Earth, returning those experiments for analysis back on the ground. But everything's looking great on the station side. We'll have some configuration work to do right before Dragon shows up, but everything looking good. The team has given their go from Houston for launch, and so we're looking good. So let's get back to the countdown. I'll send it over to Jasmine at the Kennedy Space Center.
Thank you to both Dan and Megan for those updates. It's great to hear we're looking good for tonight's launch. We are now at about 18 minutes and counting from liftoff of CRS-27. So let's get a closer look at some of the science flying on this mission. Why are we sending heart tissues, biofilms, and bacteria to space? Dozens of new experiments will soon arrive at the International Space Station for the benefit of humanity and future missions. Let's take a look at what's on board the 27th cargo mission from SpaceX. 3D cultured cardiac muscle tissues are returning to microgravity to help develop new therapies for cardiac dysfunction on Earth. Radio-tolerant organisms exposed to the space environment could reveal clues to the survivability of these organisms in space and the origins of life on Earth. Researchers are sending heart organoids back to space to test drug combinations that may reduce microgravity-induced changes in heart cell function. A student-manufactured project will provide an easier way for astronauts to position video and still cameras in the middle of a module. Astronauts will control liquids using capillary forces over a range of liquid viscosities to inform the design of more efficient carbon dioxide removal systems in space. Researchers continue to analyze bacterial biofilm formation and the antimicrobial properties of metal surfaces in microgravity. These experiments join the hundreds of ongoing investigations aboard the orbiting laboratory. That was just a brief look at some of the science on CRS-27. So now let's take a deeper dive. Students from the University of Arkansas have a small satellite on board that could help us declutter space. Joining us now to talk more about it is Samuel Cano, PhD student from the University of Arkansas. Welcome, Sam.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Sam, your team is working on something that can get rid of what we know as space junk. How does it work?
Yeah, so nowadays deorbiting is just as important a mission concept as any. So we're hoping to test a subsystem aboard ArcSat-1. It's called the Solid State Inflatable Balloon, so I call it SSIB. And to put it, simply, At the mission's conclusion, we'll activate this SSIB board, which has solid sodium azide inside of these wells. So we heat it up, it releases nitrogen gas and fills a balloon. And what that does is increase the drag of the spacecraft, which in turn decreases the time it'll stay in orbit.
Wow, that's pretty complex, Sam. And you guys are packing a lot of science into this tiny space for the CubeSat. So ArcSat-1 is the first CubeSat selected by the CubeSat Launch Initiative from Arkansas, and their goal is to get all 50 states. That's very exciting. How do you feel being part of that first?
It's amazing. I mean, it's twofold. So, you know, from a technical standpoint, we have ArcSat-1 tonight, hopefully, and ArcSat-2 in the next year. And they're both technology demonstrators for ArcSat-3. And to explain that really simply, I'll just say it's a two-body spectrometer where we hope to maybe send a pair of these really small CubeSats, which is very cost-effective, to other planets. And they will basically orbit in formation flights, where one emits a laser, one receives it, and can create a more comprehensive map of the atmosphere of, you know, say, Venus in a matter of weeks. That's the idea.
Wow, and it's neat, too, to think that you kind of have a longevity experiment here with ArcSat-1 going into 2 and 3. Will you be working on 2 and 3 as well?
Of course, yeah. Right as soon as I get back, it's ArcSat-2 time.
Fantastic. So you said that's launching next year. Can you tell us a little bit more about how ArcSat-1 is going to build up to ArcSat-2?
Sure. So almost all of the subsystems aboard ArcSat-1 are designed and tested in-house at the University of Arkansas. So this is our real, you know, this is a big test. A lot of the hardware we're able to use for ArcSat-2. ArcSat-2 will be a little bit bigger, but it'll build off of ArcSat-1, and it'll have thrust on board too, so that's a new challenge for us, but we're excited about it.
Yes, and we're excited with you too, Sam. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, best of luck to you and the team from Arkansas. There's another student-led experiment on this mission, and it will help astronauts take better pictures in microgravity. A team of high school and middle school students worked with NASA's HUNCH program to create a ball clamp monopod, and it's not your average selfie stick. In this experiment, a platform attaches to the space station handrail and is tested to hold a camera and track targets. The temporary stable platform is expected to make capturing images much easier and faster. All right, now we are at about T-minus 13 minutes and counting from liftoff of the 27th Commercial Resupply Services mission from both NASA and SpaceX to the International Space Station. So let's bring back Zach now to tell us more about Dragonflight history and its impact on human spaceflight.
Thanks, Jasmine. As I mentioned previously, the Dragon supporting today's mission will be embarking on its third flight and will be joining the Crew 6 spacecraft already docked at the International Space Station. And speaking of Crew 6 lifted off from the same launch pad just 12 days ago on March 2nd with NASA astronauts Stephen Bowen and Woody Hoberg, UAE astronaut Sultan Al-Nayati, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrei Fedyaev, arriving at the orbiting laboratory about 24 hours later. Upon arrival, they were greeted by the Crew 5 astronauts who have been living and working on station for almost 6 months.
We are close to finding out which 4 astronauts will be among the first crew to lift off on the Artemis II mission. We have that update and more in our Artemis Moon Minute. Right now, technicians at NASA's Michoud Assembly Facility are hard at work on our Space Launch System rocket for Artemis II. They've moved the engine section to the bottom of the 212-foot tall core stage. And next, they'll add the RS-25 engines, which will help power our missions to the moon. On April 3rd, we'll find out which 4 astronauts will travel around the moon in the Orion spacecraft as part of Artemis 2. Artemis 2 builds on the success of the uncrewed Artemis 1 flight test. We documented its journey in our Path to the Pad series, streaming right now on NASA's YouTube channel and on Hulu. As you just heard, the Artemis 2 crew will be announced on April 3rd at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can watch that right here on NASA TV and on our social media channels. Our missions to the moon are setting us up for Mars, and when we get there, we don't want to bring any microorganisms with us. The European Space Agency will research how different bacteria form and grow on metal surfaces. They'll be looking at how bacteria like staph form on steel, copper, and brass. They want to know which metal has the best antibacterial properties. And prior to this mission, scientists studied biofilm on board the space station and looked for ways to protect astronaut health and safety while they're living in the orbiting laboratory. Additionally, the Japanese Space Agency is trying to identify if any plants could survive and grow on the moon or even on Mars. These 7 samples of microbes you see here will be exposed to the space environment for up to 6 months. Then they'll come back to Earth to see if the spores can survive and grow, as well as their tolerance to UV light and conditions out in space. Well, we know that the weightlessness of space can have a significant effect on our bodies, but especially on our hearts. Joining us now is a member of the Cardinal Heart 2.0 team from Stanford University, Joseph Wu. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Jasmine.
Of course, we're really excited to have you here. You guys are doing some very interesting research with Cardinal Heart, and you started with the first experiment, but now you're on the 2.0 version.
Right.
So can you tell us, what are you looking at in Cardinal Heart 2.0?
Yeah, that's right. So we're very much interested in understanding the effect of microgravity on the cardiovascular system. And as you may recall, back in 2016, we did our first experiment, which was we sent human-induced pluripotent stem cells that have been differentiated into cardiomyocytes, beating cardiomyocytes, and we generated this from 3 different individuals. We sent it up to space, and we found there were changes to these 2D human cardiomyocytes. So we followed it up with the December 2020 launch, in which we used 3D human engineered heart tissues. And in this case here, this allows us to understand the interaction of all the different cell types in the heart. The heart has cardiomyocytes, has fibroblasts, and also has endothelial cells. And what was surprising to us is that even the non-beating cardiomyocytes, for example, the fibroblasts, also show some altered function due to the microgravity. So in this current launch, what we're interested in is setting up these 3D human cardio organoids. So we sent up 3,888 cardio organoids to be exact, from 4 different individuals, 2 male, 2 female, 2 Caucasians, 2 African Americans. And here, we're trying to understand what is the effect of microgravity on these cardio organoids. We're also screening for different FDA-approved drugs that can be used to mitigate the effects of microgravity. And this is obviously in collaboration with the NIH NCATS, also with the International Space Station, and also with BioServe Space Technologies in Colorado, and also with UCSB. And finally, we're very grateful for the astronauts who's going to take care of these, what we call babies, for the next several weeks.
Right, yes, they're taking care of those babies that you guys have worked very hard on. And, you know, we're talking about doing this on the International Space Station, which is in low Earth orbit. But why is research like this so important as we're looking at going into deep space, you know, to the moon and then on to Mars?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, right? Because, as you know, for deep space travel, microgravity and lack of gravity is an important issue. And, you know, this is part of the reason why the astronauts, they need to be on stationary bikes when they're up in space. Also part of the reason why when they come back to Earth, you know, for the first 2 to 3 days, they have to adjust to the effect of gravity on our cardiovascular system. So what happens is, without gravity, your muscles, heart muscles, skeletal muscles, and also your blood vessels all atrophy. And so as you go deeper and deeper into space, for example, traveling to Mars, we're talking about a longer period of time without the effects of gravity on the cardiovascular
Stage
system.
1 fuel load
So you're going to
is complete.
experience more issues, and that's part of the
Right.
reason why these FDA-approved drugs are important.
Yeah, it's very important. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for being here,
Thank
Dr.
you
Wu.
so
We
much.
really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, now we're just about 7 minutes, or actually 6 minutes until liftoff of CRS-27. So let's bring back Megan now here on Florida Space Coast and Zach live at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California to walk us through the final moments of countdown. Over to you guys.
Minus 5 minutes and 48 seconds, and the SpaceX team is working no significant issues, and the vehicle is healthy. Weather is 90% go, and the range is ready to support today's mission. At this point, Rocket Propellant 1, or RP1 fuel, is completely loaded on the second stage and nearly complete on the first stage. Now, liquid oxygen, or LOX, loading is currently underway on both stages and will complete at the T-minus 2 minutes mark before launch. We're also loading helium gas into both stages. Falcon 9 uses helium as a pressurant to backfill the propellant tanks as LOX and RP1 are consumed by the Merlin engines during ascent. Helium load began before the broadcast went live and will continue to top off until about a minute and a half before launch.
Now, to make sure engine startup goes well, SpaceX performs what it calls engine chill.
Dragon is in terminal count.
Call out for Dragon being in
Falcon
terminal
9
count.
tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
So back to that engine chill really quick. Happened T-minus 7 minutes, and that's when
And
the team
Dragon is in terminal count and it's on internal power.
flowed a small amount of the super chilled LOX into the Merlin engine's turbo pumps, and SpaceX does this to avoid a thermal shock to the system when that full flow of super chilled liquid oxygen hits the propulsion system. Now, Dragon is currently undergoing vehicle health checks with the next big step just before liftoff when Dragon transitions to internal battery power.
And in just about 10 seconds, we should see those clamp arms opening on the transporter erector. The transporter erector, or TE, is that large truss structure adjacent to our Falcon 9 vehicle. The TE is used for vehicle rollout and to route propellants and electrical power to the vehicle in preparation for launch. Once the clamp arms have fully opened, the TE will then retract away from the rocket in preparation for liftoff. In these last few minutes before T0, Falcon 9 is performing final health checks on its primary communications, avionics, and propulsion systems. And there's that call out for strong back retract. We may also hear call outs that engines are sufficiently chilled if we get a little closer to liftoff. And if you've seen in a couple of our shots here, you may have noticed the Falcon 9 booster supporting today's mission is covered with quite a bit of soot. And that's because it's no stranger to space travel, having previously supported the Amazonas Nexus mission, SES-22, iSpace's Hakuto R Mission 1, and 3 Starlink missions. And as I mentioned earlier, today's mission marks the 7th flight for this
Stage 1
booster.
LOX load is complete.
Now, this launch will bring in just under 6,300 pounds of cargo, science, and supplies to the space station. One research project will study the effects of microgravity on the human heart, and a student project that will test ways to help astronauts better capture photos and videos while working on the space station. Dragon will be docked to the space station for about a month before returning home. And right around now, checkouts for the second stage thrust vector control actuators are underway. This is often referred to as an engine wiggle test. This is when SpaceX moves the thrust nozzles ever so slightly to make sure the guidance hardware is ready for flight. SpaceX will do the exact same checkouts on the first stage engines, but that happens just seconds before ignition.
And in just a few moments, we should hear that call out for stage 2 LOX load complete.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And there's that call out. And this will wrap up propellant loading for
Dragon
both stages
in
of the
auto
Falcon 9. Dragon is also performing its final health checks to make sure all the vehicle's primary systems are ready for its rendezvous with the International Space Station. And you may have noticed some white clouds around the vehicle, but that's actually quite normal. Those clouds you see are the chilled gas above the LOX tank liquid surface that we vent overboard to maintain pressure in the tank as needed. And when that gas comes out into contact with the warm, humid Florida air, the air condenses into clouds and water.
Now, in just about 5 seconds, Dragon transitions to internal power. Falcon 9 computers will enter startup mode, which is when the Falcon 9
Falcon
flight
9 is in
computers.
startup.
There you go.
Dragon is in countdown.
Is when the Falcon 9 flight computers take control of the countdown and will guide the rocket through the last seconds before liftoff.
Go for launch.
All right, both stages are now pressurizing for launch. At launch, the International Space Station will be over the Indian Ocean, south of India, at an altitude of 261 statute miles.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Counting down for NASA and SpaceX's 27th commercial resupply mission.
$15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines full power. And liftoff of CRS-27. Go Falcon, go Dragon.
Falcon 9 soars off the launch pad. Dragon now on its way to the International Space Station with important new science experiments and crew supplies.
Stage 1 chamber pressure is nominal.
And there's that call out for Max Q. Coming up next are 5 events back to back. First is main engine cutoff, or MECO, which is when all 9 of the Merlin 1D engines on the first stage will shut down. After those 9 engines shut down, the first and second stages will separate, also called out over the nets as stage separation. Then the first stage will flip. Then the first stage will flip around to make its way back to its landing site, the drone ship named a shortfall of gravitas. The second stage will then ignite its Merlin vacuum engine to boost Dragon to low Earth orbit during SES-1. And the last event is the boost back burn to reduce velocity of the first stage in preparation for atmospheric entry. And this whole sequence will take place over about 30 seconds or so. Now we should be hearing that call out for main engine cutoff in about 20 seconds from now. Wonderful tracking shot of our rocket.
MECO. Stage separation confirmed. Back ignition.
Stage 1 boost back startup.
And there's all of those callouts for those milestones. So we had MECO, stage separation, a stage 1 flip, second engine start 1, and the start of the partial boost back burn. While a boost back burn is normally performed in order to return the first stage to one of our landing zones, here we are just performing a partial boost back. This shortened burn, possible due to payload weight, will allow us to recover the Falcon 9 booster much closer to the coast and shorten the drone ship's journey back to shore by about 1.5 to 2 days.
Stage 1 boost back shutdown.
And there's confirmation of boost back shutdown. If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live webcast for the 27th Commercial Resupply mission to the International Space Station for NASA. This is SpaceX's 17th mission for 2023 and the second Dragon flight to the International Space Station this year. We lifted off from Kennedy Space Center's historic Launch Complex 39A just about 3 minutes and 45 seconds ago. On the left side of your screen is the Falcon 9 first stage that is making its way back to Earth, and on the right side is the second stage. The second stage, and you can see that MVAC engine there. As a reminder, today's mission marks the 7th flight for this Falcon 9 booster, which previously supported the Amazonas Nexus mission, SES-22, iSpace's Hakuto-R Mission 1, and 3 Starlink missions. Now, in order to make its way back to our drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, it has 2 more burns to execute. The first is the entry burn, where 3 of the Merlin engines 1, 5, and 9, will reignite. This helps to slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. The second burn is the landing burn, and this is a single engine burn, engine 9, that brings the vehicle's speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship. Now, occasionally on your screen, when the booster is visible, you may see some nitrogen gas bursts, and these are used for attitude control as the booster makes its way back to the drone ship. Falcon 9 is also equipped with 4 hypersonic grid fins positioned near the top of the first stage. And once in the atmosphere, Stage 1 is only using the grid fins for steering as it makes its return to Earth. These titanium grid fins will orient the rocket during re-entry and guide the rocket during descent. And there's that call out for nominal trajectories. On the left side of your screen, you can just make out some civilization of Earth, on Earth. In just about 8 seconds from now, we should see that first stage entry burn begin.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Right now, on the right side of your screen, you can currently see that. You currently see Stage 2, and there's confirmation of first stage entry burn startup, and probably saw it as well. Again, this is the first of 2 burns that the booster performs before landing on the drone ship.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Now, as we get closer to the first stage landing, it's good to note that the Falcon 9 first stage is equipped with 4 landing legs made of state-of-the-art carbon fiber with aluminum honeycomb. And these are placed symmetrically around the base of the rocket and deployed just prior to landing. If successful, this landing will mark the 178th time that we've recovered a first stage booster, including both Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy missions. And we're about 15 seconds or so away from landing. The vehicle is traveling about 1,600 kilometers per hour. And this really puts into perspective the deceleration of the rocket. In the span of less than a minute, we'll have reduced from twice the speed of a jet all the way down to 0 as the rocket lands.
Stage 1 landing burn.
There's the start of that first stage landing burn on the left side of your screen.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
And there you saw the Falcon 9 first stage successfully land, and you can probably hear the cheering behind me. The Falcon 9 first stage that supported today's mission landed for the 7th time, having previously supported Amazonas Nexus, SES-22, iSpace's Hakuto-R Mission 1, and 3 Starlink missions. Today's landing also marks the 178th successful landing for an orbital-class rocket. As mentioned previously, today's recovery operations are being managed by an all-female recovery team, and this is a really cool moment for the industry and SpaceX. There's that call out that stage 2 FTS is saved. And we should have second stage engine cutoff here shortly.
Seco.
There's that call out of SECO.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And there's the key call out of nominal orbital insertion. At T plus 9 minutes into the mission, we are coming up on the last major task for stage 2, commanding separation of Dragon a couple minutes from now. We expect to have video of Dragon separation from the top of the second stage, which looks into the trunk. CRS-27 will be joining the Crew 6 vehicle currently on orbit, so we'll be back to having 2 Dragon spacecraft docked at the International Space Station.
Expected loss of signal, Kate.
As for cargo, today we will be delivering more than 6,000 pounds of science, research, crew supplies, and vehicle hardware to the orbital laboratory and its crew. To date, SpaceX has sent and brought back over 270,000 pounds of crew and cargo to and from the space station. As a reminder, this is the 3rd flight for this Dragon capsule, having previously supported CRS-22 in June of 2021 and CRS-24 in December of 2021. Once the Dragon capsule jettisons from the second stage, it has 16 Draco thrusters, each with the capability to deliver 90 pounds of force, and those will be used for maneuvering. There are 4 pairs of 3 thrusters spaced evenly around the capsule, as well as 4 forward bulkhead thrusters underneath the nose cone. Now, notably, Dragon does not have super Draco thrusters, seats, or life support systems, as it is not carrying crew, and this saves on weight, space, and also allows for a faster refurbishment time. And while initial designs of Dragon carried solar arrays extended outward from the trunk, the cylindrical structure located directly behind the Dragon capsule, the current Dragon has these arrays fixed directly to the trunk, and you may see at some point both a light and dark side of the trunk, and that dark side is actually those solar panels, and the light side is a radiator to help cool the spacecraft. And once the Dragon capsule reaches the ISS, it will be able to autonomously dock using its navigation sensors, centerline camera, and light detection and ranging equipment. It's also good to note the Dragon capsule is connected to the trunk beneath it via the trunk claw and connects thermal control, power, and avionics systems components between the trunk and the capsule. And if you're just joining us, you're watching a live view of Dragon successfully disconnecting from the second stage, heading to the International Space Station. This is the 27th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station for NASA. This is SpaceX's 17th mission this year and second Dragon flight to station for 2023. We lifted off about 12 minutes and 23 seconds ago from Kennedy Space Center at Historic Launch Complex 39A. And there you can see Dragon slowly drifting away from the second stage. The next milestone coming up is the nose cone opening sequence, which protects the docking ring and navigation sensors. And that's going to do it for me here in Hawthorne, so I'm going to throw it back over to Dan in Houston.
Hey, thank you so much, Zach, and hello everyone once again from Mission Control Houston. Great to see another Dragon on orbit. You've got a happy team here in Mission Control, and we'll have a happy crew of 7 astronauts and cosmonauts on board the space station when they wake up tomorrow with Dragon now on its way. As Zach said, the next milestone that we're going to be keeping an eye out for is going to be the nose cone open. This takes a couple of minutes, and that's to open the nose cone, so it's exactly what it sounds like. It's at the very top or the nose part of Dragon, and that's going to slowly open up to reveal a couple of different components. That nose cone stays closed during the flight up to orbit, just to protect some of those more sensitive instruments from the thermal and aerodynamic loads that Dragon's experiencing on its ride uphill. Once it opens up, we're going to be revealing a couple of different things, including some propulsion elements, primarily for forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. Those are the primary thrusters that Dragon is going to be using for its major delta velocity burn. So those are just firings of the engines to gradually raise its orbit as it gets closer and closer to the space station. It's also going to reveal a suite of navigation equipment. Dragon has a couple of different methods to essentially find its way through outer space. And underneath the nose cone, there is something called the Dragon Eye, star trackers, and then it will also be pairing that with an inertial measurement unit and GPS sensors, all of these kind of working in tandem to essentially tell Dragon where it is in outer space and where it needs to head. We also do what's called a state vector upload to the spacecraft just prior to launch, telling it where space station is. And then once it gets closer, we'll have what's called relative GPS systems that will be able to talk to each other between Dragon and space station, just as they start talking to each other, let them know where they are. And those come really in handy when we start getting into the integrated operations, which you're going to be seeing a lot more of this room once we arrive on Thursday morning. As when we're in integrated operations, you've got a team here in Houston and a team out in Hawthorne that are working to bring us Dragon in. But we are getting closer to that nose cone to start opening. There are 12 hooks around essentially the docking ring of the Dragon spacecraft. 6 of those are actually holding the nose cone in place during the launch. All 12 are closed when we're launching, and we open them up. If you've watched any of the previous crew missions or even the cargo missions, we do them in 2 different sets, 2 sets of 6. So one set already open, the second set opening now, and once that second set is open, the nose cone will start to deploy. Again, it takes a couple of minutes for that nose cone to open, usually about 5 minutes or so, and then it'll gradually open. It swings open a little more than about 110 degrees, so that gives Dragon plenty of clearance to dock with the space station, as this is going to reveal also the docking ring, and that's what Dragon's going to be using to actually dock with the International Docking Adapter on board the station. Again, we're heading to the forward port. We have 2 of those on the U.S. segment right now with the docking adapters, the forward port and the Zenith, or the space-facing port on Node 2, the Harmony module. And this Dragon is going to be bound for the forward port. It was just left vacant by the Crew Dragon Endurance, which brought Crew 5 home over the weekend after 157 days in space. And this Dragon is bound for that one to kick off really about a month and change of really intense cargo and science operations. But at this moment in time, one set of hooks open. We're still waiting for that second set of 6 to open up. And then once that happens, the nose cone will start to deploy. Shortly after that, we'll do checkouts of those forward bulkhead Dracos, those 4 Dracos that are hiding underneath the nose cone right now. And once those are checked out, we'll be pretty much ready to go. And as Dragon will start to do its different phasing burns to get to the space station. Sounds like we've got all 6 of the second set are now open and just standing by, and it looks like the nose cone has started to deploy. So again, this is going to kick off a couple of minutes for the nose cone to fully open, but all hooks are open and the nose cone is deploying. While we wait for the nose cone to open, I do want to bring in, we have a guest real quickly. We have Phil Dempsey. He's the manager of the Vehicle Integration Office in NASA's International Space Station program, basically the guy overseeing all the different spacecraft responsible for bringing crew and cargo up to the space station. Phil, first, thanks so much for joining me. Just want to get your thoughts real quick. Walk us through, we've got another Dragon mission heading to the station. What's this going to mean for those crew members on board?
Hey, yeah, thanks. So first of all, just saw a really great launch from our SpaceX team down here in Florida. Getting a new Dragon is really exciting for the group for a couple reasons. First, like you just kind of mentioned, these cargo missions are really action-packed times for the crew. It starts when they dock Thursday morning, we're just getting into the vehicle, getting critical research out and into its location on the ISS. Then the crew does some standard cargo ops and payload moves across this 30-day mission. But while they're doing that, they're also doing critical research that actually has to be completed during the dock mission in order to get those results back down on that same vehicle when it comes down a little over 30 days after it goes up. Then it's time to get it repacked with hardware. Additionally, these cargo missions are the few chances we have to get fresh or refrigerated food up to the crew. So, we give them a little taste of home. They got some fresh fruit and cheeses on this one.
And I know they're asleep, but I think they're going to be pretty excited when they wake up. We actually have some live views now of the nose cone opening. We're about halfway through. But Phil, before I let you go, just general feelings from you, the program. This has been just another incredibly busy spring. It feels like we're always in the busy season with Station. We just brought a crew home over the weekend after launching another one. What's it been like to just balance all of the traffic coming and going from the space station?
Yeah, it seems like we're partway through and there's a lot going on. It is really exciting. As for the pace, most of us probably wouldn't have it any other way, I'll tell you. We're in our third decade of operating this orbiting research facility, and these are the crew and cargo missions to keep it going. But if you look ahead, added into that mix, we got an upcoming Boeing first crewed flight. We've got a second private astronaut mission. So while busy times for sure, it's really inspiring what we're doing across, in this industry, across this, dedicated and great partnerships with NASA, commercial, providers and international teams. It's just really exciting for the program, and we're really proud to be part of it.
All right. Well, again, that was Phil Dempsey. Phil, thank you so much for dialing in. And Phil's the manager of the Vehicle Integration Office from the International Space Station program for NASA. Thank you, Phil.
All right. Thanks. You have a good evening.
You too. All right. We are very close now to the nose cone being open. Looks like it just has a few more degrees to go. And we'll stand by and wait for confirmation on the loops to hear that again. Once we get the nose cone open, it'll be time for Dragon to reorient itself to maneuver for some forward bulkhead Draco checkouts, and then that'll be the last thing we do in the next couple of minutes before it's time to start those phasing burns. And as I was talking through there, we actually just heard the nose cone is now open. So Dragon already stepping through its automated sequence, getting ready to do the checkouts of those forward bulkhead thrusters. And then once those are ready, we'll be set up and good to go and ready to do our phasing burns. So really great to have a Dragon back on orbit. The 27th resupply mission to the International Space Station on its way, a safe, healthy Dragon, bringing over 6,000 pounds of cargo. With the nose cone open, Draco checkouts underway. That's going to do it for us here in Houston. We'll be back on Thursday morning to take you through the final moments of Dragon's approach and docking to the International Space Station. But with everything successful today, I'm going to send it back to close things out to Jasmine at the Kennedy Space Center. Jasmine.
Thanks so much, Dan. Another beautiful launch from the Space Coast this evening. That's going to wrap up our coverage for the launch of the 27th Commercial Resupply Services mission from NASA and SpaceX. Dragon is now on its way to dock to the International Space Station Thursday at 7:52 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll have live coverage of that at 6:15 a.m. on NASA TV and on nasa.gov/live. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll leave you with a replay of today's launch. But until next time, go NASA, go SpaceX, and go CRS-27.
15 seconds. T-minus 10. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines full power and liftoff of CRS-27. Go Falcon, go Dragon.
Falcon 9 soars off the launch pad. Dragon now on its way to the International Space Station with important new science experiments and crew supplies.
Stage 1 chamber pressure is nominal.
At SAS, we love bold questions. Because with the right analytics, we make data do amazing things, like turn data into answers and ask the questions that move the world forward. SAS.
Include the flight surgeon. They ride along, and then in the third Tesla, those astronauts are with a second closeout lead. They take some of the closeout team with them on the way to the pad. And take a look at the license plate. We saw this last time. Crew Dragon with a number 6 for the G.
Yeah, and this time I know. So last time I was surprised to find out that it changes each time. I was thought that it always said send it with a 3, but it turns out that was only for Crew 3. So
Crew 3 was a special mission. Maybe not special enough for to put it on every single.
Maybe I've been watching that video too much. You see Nora is at the back of that third car. She's in the new class of astronaut candidates from the UAE. Training with who we call the Flies, which is the 2021 class.
Yes. New partnership with the UAE for commercial crew. And now the families get to go up to the window.
Yep, and they just saw Hazza leave the frame, who was the first astronaut from the UAE to go into space. And then he and Sultan actually trained together in Russia, and then Hazza has been Sultan's backup here in the U.S. So a long partnership between the two of them, training together both in Russia and here.
And we'll hear from Hazza a little bit later on in the show. Our own Jasmine Hopkins is going to be interviewing him again tonight. Look forward to getting the words from him and find out if he was able to catch up with Sultan in the interim.
So the final chance here, so when they get in the Teslas there, they actually hook them up to cooling boxes. So I mentioned before, you saw the SpaceX people kind of going behind the scenes. They get those positioned in the Teslas, so that's why there's some more time, and they use every second they can to talk to the families, which is why they have the windows down, still chatting with them, while the flight docs connect their suit umbilicals to those cooling boxes. That essentially just pumps cool air into the suit, because in the warm, humid Florida weather, it can get somewhat sweaty in there if you don't have some cool air flowing through it.
Right, especially in the tight space.
Exactly.
Did you roll down your window when you were riding out? I saw during demo 2, Bob and Doug rolled down the window briefly.
We did initially, but I put them up once we got going.
And here we go with the crew departing the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building. This begins the 20-minute drive with a full security escort across NASA's Kennedy Space Center to Launch Pad 39A. And they're firing up the playlists right now, Raj, as you know. In that first car, if you want to look up these songs and get the vibe of what they're listening to, well, Stephen and Woody are listening to Traveling Band by Creedence Clearwater Revival, May We All by Florida Georgia Line and Tim McGraw, The Space Traveler's Lullaby by Kamasi, he's an American jazz saxophonist, Sing Me to Sleep by Alan Walker, Spaceman by Harry Nilsson, and then in the second car, they got quite a playlist as well.
Yes.
What did you listen to?
So this is it was a collaboration. So Tom and I were in the first car, and then Kayla and Matthias had a mix of U.S. and German songs. So it's like you said, it's kind of the emotional setup for the ride. I think the other benefit of Scrub is we had the benefit of having multiple trips out there, is that the person who's your DJ has the chance to actually zero in the songs. And so Melissa, who was our chief trainer at SpaceX, actually took the time while we were in quarantine to mix together like a 2021 version of a mixtape, so that we could just play it on the iPod they had in there and time it so that exactly as we were pulling up, we were
finished with the list.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a mix of everything from Blue Light Orchestra to some Guns N' Roses. A little bit of some Hugh Jackson. It was a pretty good mix. Actually, Tom and I think Kayla and Matthias, in the travel back and forth to SpaceX and back and forth to different training locations, that's how we sort of sussed out what's on that playlist. I'm sure they did the same for tonight.
And with a great finish of the song, as we just saw there, we have, of course, permission to go through those stoplights with the full security escort. And hey, folks, listen, Raja has some great insight into space flight, what it takes to be an astronaut, how he got there. If you want to ask some questions, we want to invite you to participate. If you'd like to ask him a question over the next 3 hours, jump on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, and send your question with the hashtag AskNASA We look forward to hearing from you, and I know Raja really enjoyed answering the questions the other night, and he'll do it again. Let's introduce you now to today's crew. Captain Stephen Bowen. He hails from Cohasset, Massachusetts, and is married with 3 children. He holds the title of first U.S. Navy submarine officer to be selected as a mission specialist by NASA. Captain Bowen is also a veteran of NASA's space flights, including space shuttle flights on the STS-126, 132 and 133. During those missions, he and his crew expanded the living quarters on the ISS, delivered an integrated cargo carrier, and a Russian mini research module. He has logged more than 40 days in space, including 47 hours and 18 minutes in 7 spacewalks. He's the wily old veteran, and today he's the commander of Crew 6, a position you know well.
I do, yeah, and it's a great position for him to be in. Like you mentioned, he's got some serious experience and street cred, and much like Tom Marshburn on my flight, trusted to mentor and lead 3 rookies going up there, and so I know he's well up to the task and enjoying going on this trip.
Sitting next to Stephen is pilot Warren Woody Hoberg. The 37-year-old is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He studied aeronautics and astronautics from MIT before getting a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California, Berkeley. During grad school, Hoberg worked as an EMT with the Yosemite Search and Rescue. Crew 6 will be Hoberg's first flight since NASA selected him to be an astronaut in 2017. He is also a commercial pilot with instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings. As pilot for Crew 6, he will be responsible for spacecraft systems and performance. Aboard the station, he will serve as an Expedition 68 and 69 flight engineer.
And his most important role is to continue the presence of turtles on the space station. So what he also commonly referred to as the smartest turtle, but also the most humble one. You wouldn't know that talking to him. But any of the things on his
countdown, advanced team is complete, ready for crew arrival.
You just heard the core call for countdown, timing for the crew arrival. But yeah, all those things Woody's done by themselves would be amazing, let alone in combination.
In the role of mission specialist is astronaut Sultan Al-Niyati. He was chosen by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates to be part of Expedition 68-69. The father of 5 spent most of his life in Al Ain and Abu Dhabi, but in 2020 traded that in for astronaut training in Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center. This will be his first trip to space. You're familiar with flying with a bunch of rookies.
Yeah, exactly. And can't understate how important this is. The first UAE astronaut going up on a U.S. commercial vehicle to the U.S. segment of the station. This is amazing. Coming to fruition of a long partnership and a lot of work to get us here.
We saw a shot of the vehicle assembly building dead ahead, and they'll get up, make that right-hand turn, and go right by it. Talking about the mission specialists, it's also the first trip to space for the second mission specialist, Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrei Fedyaev. Andrei was selected as a cosmonaut back in 2012. He will be working to monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. And once on board station, he will be a flight engineer for Expeditions 68 and 69.
Yeah, and great to have Andre on board. I flew out here and back with Christina Cook for the first launch attempt, and she knows him and just has just an amazingly big heart, and it's going to be a joy to work with on the space station.
Missed getting into space on his 42nd birthday the other day, but I'm sure he'll take a belated birthday present in the form of a launch tonight.
I'm sure they had some extra cake back at crew quarters for him afterwards. So we also got to break in. We mentioned last time, it's the first time they're using the black Teslas versus the white Teslas. So not sure if maybe Crew 6 may have zapped the windshields an extra time to count for their second trip out there. So there's definitely some room to be filled on these windshields, and maybe hide some stickers at a few places where they find after the fact.
Yeah, those stickers will, get to go on those Teslas for the first time since SpaceX told us they're expanding their fleet of ride-out vehicles.
And we know they're getting close because I can hear the helicopter.
There it is, passing overhead as they pass in front of the Kennedy Space Center VAB, and just a few feet away from the turn basin. And while we're looking at the VAB, the home of the Artemis 1 mission and all Artemis missions, it's a good time to talk about what happened at the turn basin the other day. They're getting ready to pass by that body of water, as we see some folks waving at those cars as they go by. Several weeks ago, NASA's recovery team was in the water, training to return NASA astronauts after a flight back from the moon. So as they get ready to pass this part of the Kennedy Space Center, let's get an update about what happened out there in our Moon Minute.
Right now, NASA scientists and engineers are preparing for Artemis 2. The mission will send 4 astronauts on a trip around the moon in 2024. But before that happens, test crews are practicing how to recover astronauts from the Orion spacecraft after splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. This black full-scale replica capsule, named Vader, stands for Vehicle Advanced Demonstrator for Emergency Rescue. It spent the last couple of weeks in the Turn Basin here at the Kennedy Space Center, where it was floated on the water and tested. Crews practiced opening the hatch and installing an inflatable porch, an important piece of equipment to make sure astronauts can be recovered safely. If needed, adjustments will be made, and then it will be shipped to San Diego, where NASA and the Navy can perform recovery tests in the Pacific Ocean.
And for more Artemis updates, check out the QR code on your screen. We're going to pop it up right there. Just scan that with your smartphone, and you'll get updates from our official blog, blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis. We're always updating it with frequent updates as we gear up for Artemis 2. It's nice to see them out there already working on the next mission.
Yeah, it's been a long iteration, and since Orion, as part of the Artemis, just like the Dragon lands in the water, a lot of training goes into making sure we're ready for that.
We talked about the mission specialists, Raj, and how we've got the UAE, we've got Roscosmos. It's all a part of flying integrated crews. And for NASA, this ensures operational safety. Crew members on station are trained to do maintenance and spacewalks, and it also protects against contingencies, such as a problem with any crew spacecraft, serious crew medical issues, or an emergency aboard the station that requires a crew and the vehicle that they are assigned to return to Earth sooner than planned. We had an issue with a spacecraft on station, a backup spacecraft. The Soyuz was flown up there, but in the interim, NASA always has a backup plan. And so the astronaut that flew up on the Soyuz had a ride to go home if it was needed.
That's right, yeah. So we always talk about the next worst failure when we're looking as kind of the mindset we have at Johnson Space Center and in the astronaut corps. And so, yeah, exactly, always thinking about what could go wrong and having a plan to deal with that. And that's exactly the case we're in. Now have another Soyuz up there, and so now back to what I would call more nominal ops.
As the Caravan passes the security gate at the Launch Complex 39, let's check in now for the first time with Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and that's where we find Courtney Beasley with an update from Mission Control. Good evening, Courtney.
Good evening. Thanks, Daryl, and welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Mission Control is essentially the nerve center for operating the International Space Station, working in tandem with our partner agencies and providers around the globe. Together, we've ensured the station is ready to welcome Crew 6. Leading the team inside the room right now is Flight Director Judd Freeling. He will also lead the joint NASA SpaceX Go, No-Go polls once we're in integrated operations with Mission Control here in Houston and at SpaceX in Hawthorne, working together to bring Crew Dragon to its new home in space. Meanwhile, the crew aboard the space station is currently in a sleep period set to wake up around midnight Central Time. When we check back in later, we'll talk a little more about what the crew on the International Space Station has been doing to prepare for Crew 6. But for now, we'll send it back to the team over at Kennedy. Daryl.
All right, thank you very much, Courtney, and Mission Control ready to go. Back here at America's Spaceport, we're watching the Teslas with 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut going through the security gate at Launch Complex 39A. So this is inside the pad perimeter. It's inside the blast danger area.
Yep, and you see them going by what's called the horizontal integration facility. So you saw them drive by the VAB, which is the vertical assembly building we use for Artemis. SpaceX actually integrates their vehicle horizontally, and then it rolls out. You see those railroad tracks there. That's how it goes out on the transport erector launcher there, the TEL. So they actually stack the capsule and the trunk inside that vehicle and then roll it up the tracks there, and then the TEL lifts it up into position on the pad. And a cool view there from the lead Tesla with that out the window view as they're coming up.
Gotta love that as we're looking at the base of the rocket. And, you know, recapping again the issue from Sunday night, there was a problem with actually a clogged drain line for the TTAB system. This is the engine ignition fluid that fills the bottom there, the base of the rocket, to make sure that each of the engines of the Falcon 9 lights up. They found out about it and didn't have the confidence that they would have enough engine ignition fluid to light those engines, so they scrubbed. Raj, they later found out that there was a clogged filter in one of the engine lines, and so they changed the filter. They blew out the lines with gaseous nitrogen, cleaned them all out, and now it's up and running great.
Yeah, so it's great news. So yeah, the TTAB in super simple terms is kind of like the spark plug of an engine. So we'll talk later tonight as they're loading prop. You know, there's fuel and oxidizer that feeds the engines, but that initial spark comes from the TTAB that, you know, sort of like lighting a gas grill and, you know, reaching in there with that wand and clicking it on. So that's basically what was going on. Whenever you see signals like that, initially it's like, well, is it actually a problem or is it just bad telemetry? And that's why, you know, they talk about it through mission control, try to look for alternate sensor readings, but ultimately the safe, and as proved out, the right thing to do is to call the launch and do what's absolutely safest for the crew. We talked a lot last time.
Crew have arrived at the pad.
So you just heard the core call to the team that the crew's on the pad, and that word goes out so the closeout crew and the folks who are setting up displays who aren't watching the 4K stream know what's going on.
That's right.
But yeah, so that
they would know if they were watching.
Exactly. Hopefully they're not watching.
Right.
But yeah, so the TTAB, again, if there's ever a doubt, you know, we do have protocols for, like, is it a bad telemetry or just one bad sensor? But in this case, there's a few indications that there was something wrong, and they made the right call to stand down, and as you said, found an actual clog and fixed that. And so the good news is we're back on track.
That's a great point about the telemetry versus, you know, the problem. It can look one way, and you could find out there's a problem with the sensor, like you mentioned. But in this case, it literally was an issue that they were able to identify and then quickly correct. And so we're excited to light them up tonight. Crew 6 and NASA and SpaceX. This is our 6th crew rotation to the International Space Station since 2020. This successful NASA program is called Commercial Crew, and it's based right here at the Kennedy Space Center. Jasmine Hopkins now joins us live with one of the leaders of this program. Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Daryl. We are back tonight on the balcony of the Operations Support Building number 2 here at Kennedy Space Center. And right now, we're so glad to be joined by Kathy Leaders, the Associate Administrator for NASA's Space Operations Mission Directorate. Good evening, Kathy.
Good evening. So happy to be here.
Of course, and we are happy to have you. This is round 2, as we said earlier, you know, a second time's a charm. But really, let's talk about that seriously, that we prioritize safety here at NASA. We only launch when we're ready, right?
Yes, and you know, it kind of seems like a cliche because we say it over and over. You know, space flight's hard. We say it's really, really hard. But when you look at all the things that have to be done perfectly to make sure we're flying safely, it is hard. And it's that attention to detail that makes us ensure that we're flying our crews safely. And so you just got to step through it carefully, you know, and I tell the team one step at a time. And, you know, sometimes you can be almost at that, you know, that 5-yard line, seeing the goal in sight like we were, you know, early Monday morning. And you can have a clogged filter, and you just got to stop and say, okay, we're not ready to go fly today, and we're going to stop, take our time, get ready to go, and reset up again. But it is really, I'm very proud of the team because the way they worked through that problem and the way they said, hey, we aren't ready right now to be able to say we're safe, And so we're going to stop and make sure we've got this all figured out and then come back and fly again. I think it is a real testimony to the team.
It really is, Kathy. And as you said, spaceflight is hard, but we have been just pushing forward with the Commercial Crew Program. As Daryl said earlier, this is the 6th crew rotation flight from NASA and SpaceX to the space station. What do you think of that cadence from the Commercial Crew Program?
Well, you know, this is near and dear to my heart. And so obviously, you know, as the ex-Commercial Crew Program Manager, I'm awfully proud of the way the team has, you know, and not only the 6th crew rotation mission, but, you know, really the 7th mission with also doing Demo 2. You know, in March of 2020, as we were kind of in our campaign getting ready for the demo flight, I would have dreamed, this would have been like the greatest dream for me, that we would be here, you know, 3 years later, less than 3 years later, and have maintained this cadence of safely being able to rotate our crews. So extremely proud of the team.
Yeah, and it really does seem like almost surreal that we've come this far. And of course, we're working very closely with SpaceX on this mission, but we're adding more partners to this. What are we doing for the commercialization of low Earth orbit?
Well, this next, you know, 4 or 5 months is just going to be